it's not unusual for someone to have a successful press release and get like, 4 to 6 articles, written about them.
Hmm.
But that being said, the bulk of my customers get no media pickup. And
Hmm.
it's because they come to me with a press release that's already been written, and I can't control the ammo that they're using,
Hmm.
and it's usually the safe press releases, the new company hires, the things that really don't move the needle on newsworthiness.
Yeah.
And my job and my promotion of late has been trying to get them to do more strategic types of press releases. For example, I have one type of press release that's never failed. Every client that I've said you do this has gotten media pickup,
Hmm. Hmm.
100%. But it takes a little work, and that's like researching your industry, doing us through a survey or study. And it doesn't have to be crazy difficult. SurveyMonkey makes it very easy to create a survey. I always say throw a couple oddball questions towards the end of it. I
Hmm.
like the multi-page approach. So if someone gives up halfway through the survey, you've still got their results from the first half.
Yeah.
And the big stumbling block a lot of people have is, well, I don't know who to send it to. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of trade associations, and there are many in your industry that would be willing to send that survey to their members and promote it on social media just for being mentioned in a press release, and just tell them, I'm doing this survey. I will be mentioning you in the press release.
Interesting.
They see it as a win-win. The small and independent trade associations really see it as a win-win. The larger trade associations, I would leave alone because they like to control the content, and they're
Hmm.
just so harder to work with. But there are lots of small independent trade associations that would be very, very willing to partner with you. So it doesn't have to be extremely difficult, but generally those types of releases get anywhere between 8 and 14 articles,
Hmm.
different unique articles written about you based off of that survey. And the important thing is just to realize that you're not speaking for your industry forever. You're just taking their temperature on today, how they feel about certain things. And there are
Hmm.
things right now that a lot of people would be interested in. It's like, are people spending more, spending less? Are they having hiring pains? Are they hiring less, hiring more, going to remote? What's it look like? Because a lot of
Hmm.
people are trying to figure this out post pandemic, and they would love to get some numbers that you're going through something that they're going through, and it just makes people feel like they're on the same page. It was mostly uh, until I was around 11, normal. We sit down, mother cooked dinner.
Hmm.
And then after that, my father died. So my mother was always working. And so it
Hmm.
was just whatever you pulled out of the freezer and put in the oven.
Yep, yep. I know those days all too well too. My father passed away when I was 16, so a little older than you, but same kind of deal. So, but growing up, did you have any type of entrepreneurial tendencies or anything like that? I know that obviously, with losing a parent, you probably were a little bit more self-sufficient than what other kids may have been. But did you show any
Yeah,
early signs of business
I did.
prowess and whatnot?
I sold candy at recess,
Yeah.
and you know, uh, I would buy like a 2 for 5 cent type candy and take it
Hmm.
there and sell it for a dime each or three for a quarter. And I did that for a long time, and it worked pretty well through middle school.
Yeah, very cool. What was the hot seller for you? Do you
Candy
remember?
barrels, they were like
Oh,
little barrels. A lot of people see root beer barrels, but
okay.
these were fruit colored. I think they might have also had root beer as well.
Interesting. Ours was Jolly Ranchers. I was the Jolly Rancher slinger, so um so yeah, so what did you start your own businesses early? Did you jump into entrepreneurialism early on, or was it something that
I did. I worked for someone, and I just realized I could do this myself. And I was writing news clips, basically like executive briefs on a
Mhm.
particular industry for a trade association. And I thought I could do this. So I had a topic at the time, repetitive stress injuries, that was getting a lot of exposure in human resources
Mhm.
publications and other places. So I thought that would be a good thing. And I launched it, and it didn't do very well. And so that was like my first lesson. And then I started a email newsletter business, I think in like probably like 1997,
Wow.
1998. and it did really well. At one point it was doing 40-50,000 a month in advertising
Wow.
revenue,
Wow.
and then the dot-com crash happened and it went to zero in a
Yeah.
matter of 2 months. It
Yeah.
went from 40 some thousand to zero in 2 months, and that's
That's
when I was like, I knew that wasn't a sustainable model for me. So I fortunately sold some of the list at the time, because some people didn't believe that this was going to be, that we would recover from it.
yeah.
And one of the lists that I had was media, and I had contacted all these journalists and asked them if I could send them interesting stories, and that was the only thing that still continued after that. And it was basically the engine that drove eReleases, and so I
Uh-huh.
just kept at that.
Interesting. Interesting. So I mean, number one, you were collecting emails before I'm sure a lot of people even had email addresses, right? I mean,
Right.
what was it like early in those early days, trying to launch that type of a business when, again, people were still like, what is the internet at this
Right.
point?
So it was a little bit of the wild, wild west, but there was lots of sites that had traffic and were looking to monetize. And I would say, hey, could you put check boxes on your website and collect email addresses as people register? There was a lot of
Yeah.
lotto sites, free lotto and stuff like that, that would just get millions of visitors. And so they were looking to monetize. And so they would do that. You had to watch them, because every once in a while they'd put the check on there that was already pre-checked, and
Oh
so the
yeah.
people weren't really opting in. They were just, here's a bunch of stuff that you're is being forced. So I would have to check on them, but for the
Yeah.
most part it worked pretty well. They just were trying to make more money. So
Yeah. 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 So you sold some of the list. You got involved more in the, I guess, the media side of things. What were some of the things that you were helping these, I keep wanting to say like help a reporter out, because obviously that's kind of what you were doing before that. But what were some of the things that you were doing to connect these people, these reporters, with these interesting stories? Like, did you have some kind of a site where you're generating or trying to find or seek these interesting stories, or?
I was pitching myself on a lot of groups. I think Link Exchange was a big community
Mhm.
back then of people, and I would, say, "Hey, I've got a list of 10,000 journalists who have opted in to receive content from me, and if you have interesting messages, I'll put it in front of them for like $200 or something like
Mhm.
that."
Mhm.
And that was mostly how I found the customers. The journalist was the easy part, because most of the stuff was pretty public, and you could just call and ask to speak to someone. And if you told them, hey, I'd like to send you relevant press releases, they would give you their email address. It's the
Yeah.
exact opposite now,
Yeah.
where they don't want their email addresses out there and exposed, but it was a novelty at the time. And I think a lot of journalists appreciated the curation that we did, because we did a digest roundup, and it was very
Mhm.
popular.
Mhm. Yeah. No, makes perfect sense. What was how did you I guess leap into more of the helping people get promoted and get published, and what was the genesis to really start springboarding into that avenue of things?
Right. So before I'd left my job, my second job, I was working at a telecom research company, and doing day tips on the side. And we were sending out press releases through fax. And
Oh wow.
I just looked into how to send out a press release through other means, because faxing is very inefficient. I
Yeah.
literally spent 2 days punching in numbers. It held 100 numbers, and we had 190 people we needed to reach. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, I had to delete them all,
Oh
and
geez.
then program the second half. And I did make an appeal to, let's get a second fax machine and program the first 100 numbers here, 100, and they were like, oh, they're like $2,000. We can't
Yeah.
justify that. Your time isn't worth that much to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I saw that as I was faxing, I would get journalists calling me and saying, hey, you publish a lot of numbers and statistics. Do you have that in Microsoft Word? You could just email us. It's easier for us to work with. And that's where I felt like email was so much smoother and easier.
Hmm.
And that was my goal. And at the time, there was nobody really sending out releases. There was no presence. You could use the wire, which was very expensive at the time.
Hmm.
And I launched it as a standalone to help entrepreneurs and basically anybody who wants to get the messaging out, authors, speakers, lots of different people. And now we're seeing a big trend where even established authors are being expected to do their own marketing. And
Hmm.
so they're, leaning on services like eReleases. Interestingly, the Newswire approached us many years ago and said, you should also send through us. And I pointed out that they charge like $1,000 to move a 500-word press release nationally. And so, I showed them who my customers were and what their price points were. And we sort of crafted a custom solution for us that sort of takes into account the people that we already reached through email
Hmm.
and also their workflow. They have an overnight editorial staff that doesn't do very much, but they got to be there because there
Yeah.
might be a recall or breaking news or something, and they have to be available. So we set up all of our releases by default for the next business day so that they can work on it during that downtime and it doesn't cost them any additional labor.
That makes sense. Yeah, 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 yeah. So, what types of results, or what type? Yeah, I guess what types of results are you able to capture for your customers? What are some of the things that they've received because of some of the exposure that you've been able to capture for them?
Right. So early in the pandemic, we did a release for the Dining Bond Initiative, which was sort of set up on the war bond concept. And
Hmm.
basically, you could nominate a local favorite restaurant that was closed right now because they all were closed. And if they accepted, they would contact them. And if they accepted, you could make a what would basically be a donation backed by a gift certificate. And so it generated over 150 articles at last
Wow.
count. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all the food trade publications picked it up, like 50 local newspapers across the US. And it also got international pickup, and they started adding international restaurants to the list. And it did really well. I think it generated in excess of $10 million in revenue
Wow.
to help restaurants. And like I said, hundreds of articles from one press release.
Yeah.
And so that's an extreme example of if you've got something that's extremely newsworthy and very timely,
Yeah.
and at that time it was sort of a pressure relief from all the negative news. Here was
Yeah.
something very positive. Here was something you could do that was actionable and to help in your local market. And I think that's why it did so well. But it's not unusual for someone to have a successful press release and get like 4 to 6 articles written about them.
Hmm.
But that being said, the bulk of my customers get no media pickup, and
Hmm.
it's because they come to me with a press release that's already been written. And I can't control the ammo that they're using,
Hmm.
and it's usually the safe press releases, the new company hires, the things that really don't move the needle on newsworthiness.
Yeah.
And my job and my promotion of late has been trying to get them to do more strategic types of press releases. For example, I have one type of press release that's never failed. Every client that I've said you do this has gotten media pickup,
Hmm. Hmm.
100%. But it takes a little work, and that's like researching your industry, doing us through a survey or study. And it doesn't have to be crazy difficult. Survey Monkey makes it very easy to create a survey. I always say throw a couple oddball questions towards the end of it. I
Hmm.
like the multi-page approach. So if someone gives up halfway through the survey, you've still got their results from the first half.
Yeah.
And the big stumbling block a lot of people have is, well, I don't know who to send it to. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of trade associations, and there are many in your industry that would be willing to send that survey to their members and promote it on social media just for being mentioned in a press release, and just tell them, I'm doing this survey. I will be mentioning you in the press release.
Interesting.
They see it as a win-win. The small and independent trade associations really see it as a win-win. The larger trade associations, I would leave alone because they like to control the content, and they're
Hmm.
just so harder to work with. But there are lots of small independent trade associations that would be very, very willing to partner with you. So it doesn't have to be extremely difficult, but generally those types of releases get anywhere between 8 and 14 articles, different unique articles written about you based off of that survey. And the important thing is just to realize that you're not speaking for your industry forever. You're just taking their temperature on today, how they feel about certain things. And there are things right now that a lot of people would be interested in. It's like, are people spending more, spending less? Are they having hiring pains? Are they hiring less, hiring more, going to remote? What's it look like? Because a lot of people are trying to figure this out post-pandemic, and they would love to get some numbers that you're going through something that they're going through. And it just makes people feel like they're on the same page.
Yeah, interesting. So if I was thinking of doing some type of a press release and I took the survey route, how would I mean, obviously you want it to be relevant to whatever your industry is, but do you want that survey to be, I guess, directly related to whatever it is that you do? So like you mentioned, are people having hiring problems? Let's say that I'm a headhunter, right? So, having hiring problems and a headhunter would, fit hand in hand, obviously. But let's say I make some kind of a widget and, we're having a hard time finding employees to be able to work for us. Would it really have much of an impact if we release that kind of a survey? When it's not really our industry,
I would stick with your industry. So if you're producing a particular widget, what would the customers of that widget find interesting in a survey? And so I would build it for your customers or your audience base, because if you do, and it goes to the media, it's going to reach the media that runs content for your customers. And I have had people do surveys that don't align with their customer base because they had other goals. The company in there's a local auto repair shop in Pennsylvania that was looking for links for SEO purpose. And their SEO consultant said, if you could get auto trade publications to report about you, those links would be like very valuable because they're very industry specific. And so we did a survey for them, and they got, I think, over 10 auto trade publications picked it up, and probably about 20 newspapers as well, including their local newspaper, which I told them probably wouldn't happen. But their goal was different. But I always say you want to align yourself with the goal of getting in publications that your customers read and people in your industry read.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any type of framework or anything like that to create, interesting questions for, surveys for your?
I do have a little bit more information where I talk about these 8 strategies that do press releases that are meaningful. And it's for free. I'm trying to get my customers to go through it, and it's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. The bulk of it is behind a 1 hour video, but there's a lot of supporting information. And I also drip stuff to people going through all 8 of the processes and how to do it. And I think that would help a lot of people, really get a good understanding of things that they could be doing that are more newsworthy. Not the types of releases that I'm really seeing when people are in buying decision mode and the release is already written. And because we can't go, we can only go back so much to try and make it newsworthy. And at the end of the day, I think the releases that do very well are those that sort of understand that a journalist is a gatekeeper, and you're trying to put a message out there that's compelling enough that journalist wants to share it with their readers or their audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about mistakes that a lot of people are making when they do these press releases? Obviously, you said, keep it on topic in that, but are there things that you see, time and time again that are like, that you can tell right away that's not going to do anything? Any advice there on what not to do?
Right. So if you have a personnel change, like you have a new hire, you could write a release, you can put it on your website, maybe share it with your local newspaper in a trade publication, but I wouldn't spend money sending it out. because you want to spend money sending out stuff that's got a stronger likelihood of getting media pickup. Press releases that really served you more than the journalist, going back to trying to reverse engineer something that's compelling for a journalist, those type of releases don't do very well. And unfortunately, I think the bulk of releases are written from a standpoint of me. This is what I want. This is what I'm announcing. And this is, I own this. And I think that at the moment that you can sort of come at it detached and say, yes, we're the company, we're releasing this content, but here's why it's compelling. This is why it's relevant for our customers. Here are case use studies of why this product works so well. And here's quotes from a customer who saved $7,000 through efficiency using our product. All of those types of things build a good story. And so if you can come at it as more of a story and being authentic, I think you'll have a much higher pickup rate when you do send out your releases.
And what does that pickup rate look like? How do you know, how many people have written about it or how many articles there are out there? Are these reporters or whoever it is that's picking it up? Do they reach out to you and say, hey, I want to, write about this. So here's the piece,
We wish occasionally that happens, but most of them just get turned into articles and get published. If you go to Google News and do searches on your company, that picks up about a third of it. Another half of it gets picked up through Google Web, because there are a lot of the web news sites that aren't in Google News are in Google Web. And one of the advanced search features on both the news and the web is you can select dates. So you're not interested in web pages that existed before you launched the press release, because that had nothing to do with the press release. So by defining that date and keeping on top of it, you can winnow down on the web pages that came after that and the news pages that came after that. That picks up probably about 80 to 90% of it. There's still some of it that you're just going to find out looking at your logs to your website. If you have a contact form, how did you hear about us? You occasionally get people referencing things like that. There are clipping services out there, but they're not for small businesses and entrepreneurs. You can easily spend $2,000 to $4,000 a month on monitoring, and it could take 4 to 5 months from a press release for you to get all of your pickups. So it's really not cost effective. I challenge people to try to create a 1-year PR campaign for under $2,500, which is very doable using a service like eReleases and writing the release yourself or drafting the release yourself. But I would never say spend that kind of money on monitoring. That's more for the Fortune 500 and the much larger companies to do that. But it is difficult to monitor, but it's one of those things that look at all the variables. I have customers who occasionally get pick up that they're aware of, but they also say every time we do a press release, our revenue boosts and we convert more sales. And so we know it's out there. It's just a matter of trying to track down where it goes. And so it tracking and is something that's really divided on the web. Privacy, cookies, referring links and all that stuff. It's becoming harder and harder to track. But I think that, just using best efforts, Google Web Search, Google News Search, and, having on your contact form, how did you hear about us? Or your new customer intake, how did you hear about us? Will bring a lot of people forward that, will just tell you, I read about you in this publication, or I heard about you on this podcast or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Do you often say, provide a call to action for the reader or the person who's consuming the content, meaning enter in your email address or give us a call here, or say that you read it in this in this press release? Is that a way to be able to sort of link those?
It's very rarely that those call to actions will get put into an article. But that being said, I've seen some that work very well, and that's white papers. If you have a very newsworthy white paper, you've introduced it with numbers and statistics like, hey, 74% of the people in this industry are dealing with identity theft. And here is a white paper on how to prevent that for you or whatever your audience is or something like that, that they're very likely to share that. And that's a way to collect people. But it has to be something meaningful in exchange for the email for a journalist to incorporate and include that in an article. Because if it's just a call to action in the article for a journalist, it's generally geared towards that journalist. Like if you want to download a product sheet about the product for more information, not knowing what is going to interest them, then you would link to a PDF or something like that as a call to action. But just a normal opt-in or a sales call to action generally doesn't get translated from a press release into the article.
Yeah. How much work is it, using, let's say using your system? How much work is it to go ahead and provide a press release or to create a press release that has a good chance of getting picked up? Like, our goal is to be able to get as much as much reach and publicity as what we possibly can. Is that a month-long process? Is that a few week-long process? And that's, if it's, let's say I'm not a writer, I'm trying to hire someone to write this press release. I'm obviously going to have to provide, certain bits of information, all of that. How many, iterations of that release does it go through? I'm just curious from a timing perspective, if someone has something that they want to promote, like how long before that do they need to start planning this out to be able to produce a good piece that has a good chance of, being popular?
Right. So I always tell people that when you're looking at PR and press releases, that you want to do a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases. It doesn't make a lot of sense to measure whether PR works for you by doing one press release, especially if it's one that you just came up with without going through my 8 strategies for newsworthy press releases. And so many people do judge PR on, I've got one really important thing to me, and I'm going to send the release out, nothing happens, and then they feel PR doesn't work.
Yeah.
And yet people in their industry are getting picked up, here and there by doing stuff that engages the media and interests them. So the amount of time it takes, generally, if you're writing the release yourself, it might be 2 to 6 hours per release. If you're doing a survey or study, you're going to add some more time because you're going to have to come up with really great questions. You're going to put it in SurveyMonkey, and then you're going to partner with a trade association, unless you have your own audience to send it to. And then you're going to take the analysis of that and find out what was the aha moments in this survey, what surprised us. And then you're going to want to put some really compelling quotes in the press release about why you feel that the survey skewed one way or the other. And then, that again might take a couple of hours for the drafting of it. We do offer writing services, but what most people will find is that if you go through a questionnaire in preparation for someone else to write it, you've done 80% of the work. The assembly of the content isn't really that difficult. So I do challenge people to try it. A lot of people might just use us the first time until they see how it works. But it's not something that should have to take a considerable amount of time. You could do, 6 releases over a year, one every other month. And like I said, probably, including a survey, that one might take a couple of days, but, the other ones are probably 2 to 6 hours minimum for, coming up with something that's really interesting and compelling. The hard part that most people don't do, and the effort that they don't expend, is that strategic part, that brainstorming for what can we say that's newsworthy, that's different than everybody else. There are blind spots in every industry, and they work so well for getting media attention. We had a local carpet company in New Jersey engaged with us, and I took their money for 5 months and they got no pickup. And I said, I don't think this is working. I did tell you in the beginning, I thought your odds of pickup were really low. And we just brainstormed, and I found out that their biggest enemy was the big box home improvement stores, not other local carpet companies. And they said, we can compete with other local carpet companies, but these big box home improvement stores, they hire people who are basically licensed in home improvement, and they may have never installed carpeting before, and they don't care, and they never know who's going to do it because they just have a pickup list and say who's available tomorrow to install flooring, and they may have never installed flooring before ever. And so that's the people that they have to to really fight. So we did a press release about that, and we got picked up by more floor trade publications than we realized existed. I think over a dozen different ones picked it up. And we continued to talk about marketing and, David Goliath thing. It continued to work. So we ended up getting around 30 articles across those dozen publications over the remaining 6 months in their 1-year contract. And we also got newspaper pickup in their community, and New Jersey Magazine picked it up as well. And what they did, and what a lot of people don't do, is they took all the clips from being picked up and put them in a binder. And every time they go out and give someone a quote, they skim through that and they say, look, we may not come in the cheapest, but we've been picked up by Floor Trade Weekly. We've been picked up here. Here we are in New Jersey Magazine. Here we are in the local newspaper. And people are going to say, I'd rather go with someone that's $400 more if I feel like, I can really trust them and there's a big authority there. And so that's where, this kind of PR can be used as sales collateral. And I always tell people, when you do a press release, even if you don't get pickup, share your message with your customers, share your message with your leads. It's so easy for a lead who's on the fence to see a press release and say, this is a company that's putting out content on, what they're doing and developing. I feel a little more comfortable giving them my credit card. It lowers the threshold of them being on the fence of like, is this a reputable company to work with? Is this someplace I should be spending my dollars? And so I think that's why so many people who do press releases see an uptick in sales when they don't necessarily see all of the articles that get published.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Would you say that there's any industry that would maybe not be a good industry to do press releases in? Because I mean, you just went through a carpet supplier. I wouldn't think that, carpet suppliers would have all that terribly much to talk about, but apparently they do. So,
right. So, the industries that do very poorly are those that are restricted by the newswire. For example, they have a lot of problems with vitamin supplement companies. There's a lot of claims that are made, so they're very restrictive of the alternative health industry, and we just can't work with those types of press releases because of that. There are probably some out there that are very hard to get attention. We had someone in the cybersecurity space, and they found it very difficult to break through because it was so. The things that were interesting, the industry didn't want you bringing to light. And so they found that some of the things that they thought were most newsworthy just fell on deaf ears because people in the industry didn't want to promote it. And a lot of it was about vulnerabilities that basically every website has, and they're like, we really don't want to shine a spotlight on that. But my challenge to the customer was, I'm sure there are things in your industry that they're willing to talk about and that they do find interesting. And it does take work and brainstorming to try and figure that out. But I always tell people, when you go to a conference and you start talking to someone in your industry, you're always comparing notes on certain things. And often, if those are things that aren't talked about in your industry, those are ripe for mentioning in a press release, because it turns out it might be one of those industry blind spots.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So I guess just be a little bit more mindful as to what types of conversations you're having with other people in your industry. And there's probably some good golden nuggets,
right. Stories. The media loves stories. I had a lot of my customers, being really small, like to appear larger than they are. And I've had some of them who just tell me some really embarrassing things that happened to them. And I'm like, I would share that. And they're just like really apprehensive. But one person shared a story about how they had to cancel Thanksgiving and fill their garage with boxes and do a big shipping because they got an influx of sales they weren't expecting, and they were just operating out of their home. And I said, that's a really cute story. I would put it in there. And they got picked up by Inc. magazine because that anecdote is something that a lot of growing businesses can relate to. And so I do challenge people to just be authentic and be yourself. You don't have to appear as a large corporate client. The journalists don't like really putting the spotlight on large corporations. They love to put put it on the small new discoveries, the startups, the people who are just getting started, or just trying to build some traction in your industry.
Talk real quick about what it is that you would need to make a press release. Again, taking your platform, for instance, I mean, is it just uploading a document, or what is that? What does that deliverable look like?
It generally looks like a Word document. You can include images, but don't put them in the Word document. I mean, you can, but they get stripped out. You'd want to send them separately, because the Word program takes an image and reduces the quality of it. So it's not really applicable for, like, say, magazines and places to use. So you'd want to, we allow people to upload it separately, and then it gets put together by the newswire. You can embed a YouTube video, but it's not necessary that you do that. I do think that is something that's going to grow over time, because it seems like video is just becoming more prevalent. And I think that people are migrating to that. I'm not sure what a video press release will look like, but I find it really interesting to think about it and brainstorm with other people in the PR space about what it could be and what it could look like. And I think that's really interesting. And in addition to that, that's pretty much it. Up to 2 images and the Word document. I always tell people to try to put an image in there, even if it's a candid shot. A lot of places like the candid shots that don't look like they were, stock photos and things like that. So if you have someone, a customer who's used your product and have an image of them, that could work, as long as you have permission from them, to issue it or to use it. And I think that it's a really good opportunity, because so many online only sites realize that people are becoming more visually aware of things, and they're moving away from text. So they like to have those images to boost the story. And if they have 2 story ideas and one doesn't have a picture and one does, they're going to be more likely to use the one that does, because that's just more things that they can use to try to draw people in.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Is there anything that you would suggest to make yourself stand out more? Well, actually, I guess you mentioned Newswire. This is kind of where this is all coming out. I'm picturing Newswire is just basically this collection of potential stories that reporters go through and
right. So PR Newswire, which is the wire that we use, there's 3 real wires in the US, and PR Newswire is the oldest and largest. They're like a depository of these releases. They create feeds. So a journalist has a login to PR Newswire, or I think they used to have dedicated feeds in the newsrooms, but I don't think they're doing that much anymore. But they would log in. They might be a fashion editor, and so she would look at just everything is tagged fashion. But here's the great thing about it. There's customization. That person can say, I don't cover like ready to wear. I'm more, high fashion and stuff like that. So they can put certain keywords in there that they want to tag certain designers, and they can also put things to exclude. So if it mentions Kmart or, a lot of these retailers that, really don't apply to what their market is. And so they can make it a very customized feed for them. And that's the real value of a newswire, in that they can get very specific content that's really geared towards them. And, that makes it so much more likely that they're skimming something that's relevant for them that they would then want to turn into a story.
Yep. That makes sense. And do you have to post your keywords and all of that, or what categories you want to be shown in? It takes it all from the content?
Well, you get to choose the categories. So your industry stuff, but you don't put keywords in there. They use just the content of the release for picking it up. So you do want to make sure that your keywords are in your press release just naturally. You're not trying to game a system or anything like that, because it appears basically as it's published. So the most recent stuff at the top and everything below, as long as, if they're using keywords for inclusion or exclusion, as long as those words appear in your copy, you're likely to appear in their feed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Mickie, this is fantastic. If people want to learn more about you, your products, your services, how would they reach out and get in touch?
Sure. So eReleases.com is the website. We have a phone number and chat. You'll only speak to editors. We don't have any salespeople, and we walk people all the time through their first press release and their first PR campaign. And I do recommend that you go check out the 8 strategies for building a winning PR campaign. And that again is at eReleases.com/plan. All my social media is on my website in the lower right. That LinkedIn is me directly, and I do eventually respond to LinkedIn. So that's if you need to reach me personally, that's a good way.
Love it. Love it. Mickie, thank you for the time. And I've learned a hell of a lot about, press releases. I've tried press releases before, and I'm in the camp that it never worked for me. But I know that I didn't do it nearly to the effect that you had described here today. So I'm going to have to go back and revisit that, and we'll visit your website here and, try to get some more publicity ourselves. So thanks again for the time, and look forward to seeing more from you.
You're very welcome.